has been doing the ORS RFP for a long time, and so is supporting us as we go through this process. All right, so we'll start with a little bit about the funding round. So this RFP is a closed round. We will be distributing the awarded funds between the current ORS projects that haven't been invited and the ORS capital projects that have been awarded funding through the Housing Finance Program RFP and now need services and operating funds. If you did not submit an intent to apply by the 17th, unfortunately, the project is no longer eligible. However, I do believe that all of our anticipated projects submitted their intent to apply on time. So great job, guys. So for this funding round, we anticipate about $15 million to be available. About 5.3 million of it will be from the Homeless Housing and Services Fund. 3.5 million of funding will be from the local state share tax of 1406. About 3.7 million of it will be from the mid-behavioral health sales tax. And about 2.7 million will be from the Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services levy. So these funds, prioritize permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless households. Mid-funds specifically, we focus on non-clinical services for folks with mental health or substance use disorders. And then the chisel funds are prioritized for projects that have set aside for veterans, their families, seniors and their caregivers, and vulnerable, like resilient communities, previously known as vulnerable populations. So the ORS funding round priorities were established in 2018 by community funders, and has since, changed very little. Funding is prioritized for housing for chronically homeless households, and those that projects that incorporate housing first and harm reduction principles, projects that encourage participants to move on using community resources when it's appropriate, and projects with strong racial equity outcomes represented in their data, and those that have or are planning on demonstrating like other leveraged resources. So in particular, we're interested in FCS, but projects that have sort of funding from other organizations or other funding sources are those also that will be prioritized. The timeline is pretty straightforward. Applications applications are due September 9th, so our technical assistance deadline is going to be September 7th. We will be reviewing the applications between September through December, and then we'll get award notifications out by the 31st. And as far as contracting goes, that'll start, when your contracts are set to renew. But all of them will start after the new year. The applications will be reviewed by a review panel made of community members, interested parties, and folks with lived experience. So, and but the final award decisions will be made by DCHS leadership and approved by City Council. Sorry, County Council. I don't work for the city, y'all. All right, so application overview. So we're going to go through kind of each tab that you haven't already started to fill out. So the first one I want to address is the questions tab. It's sorted into, I think, 8 sections. And so some sections are scored, some sections are unscored, but all of the sections may influence the contracting requirements that pop up in the contract. And so, those things might be things like who you serve and the target population, and details around like whether it's permanent housing or permanent supportive housing and that kind of thing. So the first section that's unscored is basic program information. It includes like the type of housing, target population, unit information, program, and a program summary. The next section is about accessing the program. It's also unscored, but it covers how participants are referred to the program and, sort of the entrance and intake process. The third section, service provision, is scored, and it covers questions aimed at understanding your project's philosophies and practices around providing services in a housing first framework, including how the program leverages other resources to improve services. The fourth section is also scored. The engaging participants section really focuses on how the program utilizes the expertise of the program participants to improve the program. That would include how the program facilitates, how the program requests information and feedback from current tenants, and then how the program uses that feedback to improve the program. All right, so the next section, the housing outcomes section, is also scored and asks about how the program helps participants maintain permanent housing and how possible terminations are addressed. The section also has a question that asks applicants to speak to the project's data from calendar year 2021. So I wanted to give you a couple of screenshots to look at the data we're looking at. Most of you have seen this report previously this summer as we did monitorings. It's going to be the same report that we addressed or talked about in your program monitorings. But for this section, we're really focusing on, active enrollments and exits. You'll be able to find this report in your application's required documents tab. We have already uploaded it for you folks to review. So moving on, strategies is another scored section. It's really a question about how the program tries to help folks move on and graduate, if you will. Then the next set of questions are unscored. The agency questions are really about, fiscal audits, and then the indirect cost rate section is asking about whether or not this program anticipates taking a 10% de minimis rate. Happy to talk about that more if you folks have questions. I'm gonna let Devin take over now and talk about the application, the budget tabs and the table tabs.
Okay, so yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the next two tabs. The first is the budget tab, which is really a high-level request for your budget for this program or project that you're applying for in this round of the ORS RFP. And then the second tab, the tables tab, has a more detailed program budget that's inclusive of all of the funding sources that support the project you're applying for. And then there's another piece of the tables tab, which is the organizational equity chart, not related to your funding, but also very important. So we'll go over all of these things if you want to go to the next slide. So the budget tab is very high level. This is just a basic your high level request with kind of the standard line items that you're used to seeing in your contract and in past RFPs. We do have detailed definitions for these in our RFP guidelines, but I do want to take some time just to talk about what these are and what they mean. And of course, we're happy to take questions on any of this. So case management is really anything related to service coordination, generally service coordination personnel costs. This might include support for ramp-up costs in some cases, creating access to behavioral health, housing placement, and then client assistance. This is really short-time or one-time financial assistance for costs related to supporting housing stability. So This includes move-in assistance, application fees, security deposits, transportation, but that's not an exhaustive list. You can always reach out to your contract monitor to ask questions about this. Operations, fairly straightforward. This is just your building operations and maintenance. So funds that pay for the cost to operate the program, maintenance, insurance, cleaning supplies, utilities, front desk staff, those kinds of things. And then rental assistance. This is very, of course, non-time limited rental assistance. It's a subsidy paid to a landlord on behalf of one of the participants in your program to cover a portion of their rent. And generally, the participant is paying 30% of their monthly income, and the subsidy covers the balance, the remainder. And then a new line item that we have this year that we hope will be helpful to you all is for admin costs. And this is really any costs that go into administering the program. So some examples include, but are definitely not limited to, salaries and benefits for IT staff, accounting staff, compliance staff, directors and administrators. It could be office supplies and utilities. There are a lot of things that could go into that bucket. The administrative costs are could be 10% or less of expense billing and can be billed as an indirect cost rate unless your agency has a federally negotiated indirect cost rate that is higher than that. And if it's billed as an indirect cost rate, this will just be a place where you would keep documentation backup of what those expenses were to make available to us on request. And for all of these line items, obviously not everybody will be applying for all of these. You might be applying for just one or two or all of them. It really depends on your project specifically. And then we can move on and take a look at the tables tab. So the tables tab, this is going to be a complete picture of all of the funding sources that go into the project that you're applying for. So yeah, the full picture of your agency's budget for this program. Here we're asking that you name all fund sources for service personnel expenses, for operating personnel expenses, all of your non-personnel expenses for the program, and then of course funding for rent assistance. This tab is a little more detailed and complex than the budget tab that we were just discussing. So one thing to note here is that there's a column for fund source names, and you can think of this as kind of our key to know which fund sources you're including in the different columns, because in Zoom grants, unfortunately, you aren't able to edit the headers yourselves. We have to create this little key for fund source 1, fund source 2, fund source 3, fund source 4. You only need to fill that those fund source names out once. You don't need to add it to every cell in that column. It's just a way for us to tie back the fund source to the different columns, and this will make a little more sense as you look at the application. And of course, happy to answer questions there. And then, of course, there are some cells there that Zoom grants will auto-calculate that you won't need to fill anything in on, where it's subtotaling things and totaling things. So, and then we also want to see on the tables tab in your larger budget picture the voucher income that you have. So that's something just to note, to include. And then one last note on budgets and tables is just to check for consistency between the budget and the table. Make sure that those match up and fit together. All right, next slide. And then on the tables tab, separate from all of the funding, we also ask for an organizational equity chart. And this is something that was new in last year's round. So some of you might be familiar with it. Some of you might not have seen it before. This data is just helpful enough for us to know the demographics of who's in your organization. one person might be counted multiple times in the table. So if they have multiple racial or ethnic identities or other identities in other categories here, there are three different groups. There's the leadership body. These are your decision makers. This will definitely vary based on organization and type, and we don't prioritize any particular structure, organizational structure. We just want to know who's in leadership and what the demographics look like. And then staff, that's all of your full-time and part-time paid employees. And then your board members, these are the formal members of your 501c3 governing board. And then if you are applying as a fiscally sponsored entity, you can disregard that section. I'll hand it back to you, Sky.
Yes, now that I've figured out how to go through my different windows, so I can unmute myself. All right. So the last slide that, sorry, the last tab in the application is the required documents tab. We will require quite a few documents, including your agency's most recent fiscal audit, any management related findings and corrective action plan documents for the last 3 years. So one of the questions in the agency information section of the questions tab will ask you about these, and then this is where you upload those documents for us to review. If you do not, a copy of your 501c3 letter from the IRS, MOUs for projects that have partnerships with other agencies. So this might be, projects that provide services at a certain place, a certain site, but then works very closely with maybe like the housing authority, and so as the property manager. So there might be an MOU there, that kind of thing. And then a copy of your grievance policy that your program provides to participants, and the participants would use if they had a grievance. Just wanted to remind everyone that the program enrollment and exit data will be in the required documents tab for you to pull and to look at. And so that'll conclude the tabs in the applications, and sort of the overview of the application. So the next thing I wanted to address was applicant resources. So contact us at homelesshousing@kingcounty.gov. Homeless.housing at kingcounty.gov. If you have any questions about the deadlines, the RFP guidelines, or about the application content. So if you have questions about the questions, if you will, but ask. We cannot do anything about like how Zoom grants function. So if you have, questions or concerns about like Zoom grants isn't loading things, you need to change the application owner, or you need to add collaborators and you can't do that, those are things that you should reach out to Zoom grants about at questions@zoomgrants.com. And I also wanted to give you all a resource here that's new this year, called the Grant Application and Capacity Building. It's a sort of a new team and project on the county, and it provides assistance with, with technical assistance for assisting with the application. Particularly, they can help set you up with folks that can guide your grant writing to make sure that you are communicating your program's missions and competencies in the application in a way that really helps the program shine. And so, we can't, at Homeless Housing, we can't tell you guys how to write your answers, obviously, but the grant application and capacity building project does have, opportunities for assistance there. So if you are concerned about how to put your best foot forward, please by all means reach out. And so this link here at the bottom, it goes to a form that you can fill out that will help you sort of connect with them. That's everything. So now is time for the question and answers. Sure, that felt like a very a lot of information, sort of all at once. Um, and the questions that are asked today will be added to the FAQ document that will be posted and uploaded and updated regularly on Zoom Grants.
I don't see any questions in the chat, but feel free to put questions in the chat. You can also raise your hand, whatever is comfortable. I know many people are working in offices, busy offices, dealing with background noise, though.
Hold on, let me go find some Jeopardy music.
All right, looks like we have a question. Thanks, Seth. Would it be possible to talk about the FCS requirement more? Yeah, so FCS, we are just asking here that programs be connected with FCS and working to actively enroll and screen participants for eligibility for FCS and actively enroll them in FCS whenever possible. So the questions in the application around FCS specifically just ask what your current relationship is with Amera Group, which is the organization that you would contract with to administer FCS, and then it asks if you are already enrolling people in FCS, how many you've enrolled there. So there's a little bit about FCS. If that doesn't get to all of your questions, feel free to put more questions in the chat, or Seth, if you'd like to go on mute. And Anna might have something to add. She's got a lot of background on FCS.
I guess I just wanted to add for Seth's question that if you are a site-based PSH provider and the project that you're operating is a scale of, if it's more than like 50 individuals, we would really want to see that you have an active contract with Amera Group, with the reason being that we really need to maximize our resources and make sure that we're really stretching all of our dollars. So the requirement is around if somebody is eligible, that you're really working to connect them. And if you're a PSH provider who is serving the target population, chronically homeless individuals or individuals with a number of medical conditions with a PRISM score of 1.5 or higher. There's a bunch of different eligibility factors, but if your aim is to serve individuals who are FCS eligible, that you're really connecting them. So we want to see that you are both contracted with Amera Group and also trying to enroll individuals. And we know that there are hiccups with enrollments, but if you're making that effort, that's pretty much where that requirement is. So hopefully answers your question.
All right, it looks like Jane has a question. If you'd like to come off mute.
Yes. So I am the program accountant for REACH. And so I have a question on the admin rate and how you calculate that. We do not have a federally approved rate. So can you go through how I would calculate it?
Sure.
Or record my our admin.
Sure. So if you go through a de minimis rate, basically, let's say you're billing services and you're billing $10,000 worth of services, then you can also bill an additional $1,000 up to 10%, an additional $1,000 towards that admin indirect rate. And there is like some backup information that, you know, we need sort of at the get-go, and then after that we would only look at it in fiscal monitorings. But you would be able to just send in your invoice with $10,000 of services, $1,000 of admin, and then in the backup general ledger information, along with the list of let's say payroll for folks in services and the services staff, there would be maybe a line at the bottom that was like 10% de minimis admin, and then have that $1,000 at the end.
Okay. So what? Okay, so so that's great. That's what I've been doing. But what is in that base that I add the 10%? Salaries, benefits, maintenance, insurance. That's,
yes.
And I know it doesn't include client expenses, and it doesn't include rental, but I want to, could you let me know what's in that base, please?
So is the question like what is incorporated in admin?
What's incorporated in the, so you said there's $10,000 and then it's 10%, but what's in that 10,000 is what I want to make sure I'm clear on.
Gotcha. So those will be any of your project expenses. So of that, of your contract, if your contract covers operations, services, and client assistance, then, that total invoice, all of those program expenses can contribute to your de minimis.
Okay.
Yeah. So the ORS funds are fairly flexible. We like that they're fairly flexible, and we want to be able to support everybody as much as possible. And so we, all of any program expense, any eligible expense for the program will work. The admin costs can include auditing costs. I see Riz's question there. Okay. So, any other question? Oh, go ahead.
So so let's say I have 10,000 in salaries and benefits, 5,000 in like utilities and stuff like that, and then another 10 for rental assistance. Then is that total what I can use for the 10%? Is that that sounds like what you said?
Yep.
Okay, well that's okay. Great, thank you.
Typically, a program won't have both operating expenses and rental assistance. Just in general, but depending on, it really depends project to project. Do we have any other questions about admin or anything else?
I have a question about the amount we can ask for. Are we bound by, we're doing a renewal? Are we bound by what we're getting now?
No.
Should we ask? No, but
ask for the funds that would cover the program, the gaps in your funding, for the ideal situation where the program is fully staffed and has, the supports that you anticipate your participants would need. I have seen in the ORS process, grant awards go from $250,000, and then the next award was over $1 million. So this is one of those cases where we're trying to help you fund the program. We want to make sure that, y'all are leveraging all of the resources you possibly can, but we also want to make sure that we're taking into account staff raises and the cost of living increases for your clients and that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. If we have, is this our only chance to ask those kind of specific budgeting questions? Or we can write them in till a certain date? Okay, and then you'll respond.
Yep.
I just don't know, like, will it hurt our chances if we ask for more money, or will you come back to us and say, hey, you've asked for too much, we still want to fund you but not this much, or will you just knock us out, you know?
We will not knock you out. Ask for as much as you need to. It is entirely possible that we will not fund the entire request based on the recommendations of the review panel and the final decision from DCHS leadership. So, you know, there's always that possibility, but we are not going to take any application out of the running because of a large ask. We'll just adjust it as sort of adjust it based on the input from others to what we can afford.
Okay, great. And then one last question. I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand and I see one raised. Is there any funding constraint around, we like to use the flexible rental assistance for undocumented clients, and that's our priority. So people who aren't eligible for other rental assistance through federally funded programs. Thus, we're constrained by, we can't typically move those people on to other vouchers, that type of thing. So is there any funding constraints in this, the flexible rental assistance, around prioritizing undocumented immigrants, basically?
There are no constraints or requirements around rental assistance and citizenship or citizenship status. We I lost my train of thought.
Yeah,
Oh, we do prioritize like chronically homeless folks and target populations that might be like folks with mental health issues or substance abuse or substance use disorder or things like that, really from those priorities that I named earlier. But citizenship is not one of the things that we have a requirement around.
Great, thank you so much.
Gina?
Hi guys, thanks. Just a quick question. When I'm talking about two projects that I'm applying for our scattered site. And one of the questions talks about improved services over the last 2 years. So during COVID, we made some changes. I don't know that I'd necessarily call them improvements, but we had to make changes to deliver those services. Would that also apply to that particular question, is my question?
Yeah, I think that would be an appropriate place to talk about that. That's a good question, and I'm sure this will apply for a lot of people. So I'm glad you asked it. I think that would make sense to talk about changes in the program there because of COVID, and especially if there are changes that came out of COVID and turned out to be positive changes or helpful to the program in some way, then of course that would be a great thing to include. I think that there's also a question later on in the application that specifically asks about any structural changes or organizational changes, things of that nature, that might be another place to get at some of that.
Cool, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, because we went to like telehealth. I mean, that wasn't something we normally provided, but certainly during COVID, it was great. I mean, it worked. So it made changes. So great. That was exactly what I was looking for. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Dina.
Gonna go back to hunting for that Jeopardy music now.
While folks are thinking, I will just make another little plug for the grant application, grant assistance and capacity building. This is also a resource that's available to currently to agencies that currently have a contract with the county. So there are resources to help with the grant application process. But if you're currently contracted, you can also fill out that form to access capacity building, so supporting any aspect of your organization, if that's something you're interested in after the application process, after contracting currently. Want to make a plug for that too. It's really exciting, so wanted to mention that.
Riz, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. So in terms of HMIS and data, will you guys automatically pull that, or do we need to kind of do anything more from that perspective?
No, if we have the data, our performance measurements and evaluations team here at the county has pulled sort of all of the relevant data, including the reports that you folks will be looking at for those housing outcome questions, and then also the data that will present to the review panel and to leadership. Well, probably won't go to DCHS leadership unless they ask for it. But yeah, so that'll be all, like, that's already pulled. We already have that information, and thankfully it was pulled by very knowledgeable data analysts who have cleaned it up and made it sorted it all out for us. And we didn't want to put any of that burden on you folks, so there's no work that you have to do there.
Okay, thank you.
I'll add to for the data that you see uploaded in your application under the other documents tab, that's where you'll find the data report. And if you are applying for a project that is actually made up of multiple sites or multiple different projects in like a portfolio, you'll see that we've uploaded data reports for each of those specific projects. And so we'll ask just that you speak to any differences or unique pieces of that data that differ by project in those cases.
Okay, thanks. I had a quick question regarding the unscored parts of the application. How much emphasis should be put on that, given that it's unscored, and what was the main reason behind it?
I'm talking on mute. The unscored portions of the questions tab are still going to be pretty important. The review panel will be looking at those sections as well. So scoring is a big part of discussion on the review panel, but we don't recommend funding based entirely on the scoring. That's another input part for our review panel. We ask our review panel to score the questions, and so they will be paying particular attention to the answers in those scored sections. But for the unscored sections, that's still pretty important information that we need and very often informs some of the contract requirements of the next contract. So for instance, we ask you to include any set asides that you have in your project, and that may affect what kind of funding, like if you have veteran set asides, then we can potentially use veterans levy funding for you for that project. It also, those questions in the program overview are helpful both for us as your contract managers and also for the review panel to get like a sense of what your program is and give context while they're reviewing those scored questions. And then also for the agency questions at the end there, that will also inform, if you ask for de minimis rate, then that'll pop up on the contract, or and the information about like the monitorings, audits, and financial stability of the organization has come up in past like ORS review panel conversations as a factor when discussing like the funding distribution. So all of the questions there are fairly important. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. It does. So another question as we're on the topic of questions. In terms of the geographic locations, in the past, some of the RFPs have focused on South King County. Is there any emphasis in terms of locations for projects that are being emphasized by the county in this application funding?
The regional emphasis.
Yeah.
But we do like a spread across the county as much as possible. Anna, did you want to contribute?
I just wanted to add that, yeah, we definitely want to see a regional distribution of units, and there is the question in the application around like zip codes and where, where you're located and so forth. So that's important, but like we do recognize that there is a disproportionate population of individuals who are low income in South King County compared to other parts of the county. There's not going to be necessarily though, like, it's not going to be part of the ranking to weight the dollars that go out the door more into that area. We definitely do want to do a regional distribution of funds though. So it's something that we're considering. Hope that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Thoughts? Well, it seems like it's slowing down. The questions are slowing down a little. So I just wanted to thank you all for coming today and for asking questions and for being present here with us. We are available to answer more questions at the homeless.housing@kingcounty.gov email. So if you have any questions, please reach out. And we will send out a copy of the slides so that you guys have those resources there at the end as well. All right, thank you so much, guys. I don't have outro music. I only got so
Thank
far
you.
this morning.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all.
Hey, Sky, I'm going to call you because I want to know what music you had. That was awesome. I really appreciated it.
Oh, that was Andy Grammer's Give Love.
Oh, very
Um,
good.
I find that Andy Grammer is a great musician for when I want something upbeat and hopeful and
And
like
positive. Yeah.
yes, you know, there are those days where it's like gloomy outside or something and you're like, I just need something that's going to wake me up and make me feel good. And for me, that's Andy Grammer.
I really appreciate it. I wanted to tell you, I was in here over here party dancing, so I really appreciated that. Thank you very much. I'll be
Yeah,
looking that
totally.
up because yeah, we need more positive stuff. Appreciate it very much. Have a good day, you guys.
You
Thank
too.
you too,
Thank
Gina.
you.